The rest of that first night was a strange blur. Barkley found himself fixed on the monitors, watching as the plethora of animatronics roamed freely around the facility. Some were wandering aimlessly, others hunting rats and small insects, but the small number that he had already come into contact with were clearly searching for him. It was only when he began watching the monitors that he could see the true extent of the Pokeplex's issues. When morning broke, he made a swift exit, catching view of Sato's car as he ran across the car park. The window on the driver's side was rolled down, and although Barkley only glanced up for a moment, he could swear he saw a look of shock on his face. He wondered to himself, was Sato sending people in on the night to be killed by the animatronics? Or does he know something about me? He returned to his lodgings, a small, semi-detached house that acted as a safe house for when operatives were working in the area. The reality of it was that this was just one of the many bunkers the agency had in plain sight, just in case any of the creatures or species they came into contact with were world-threatening. He walked up to the bedroom, threw his boots across the room and lay down on the bed, not remembering the last time he had been as tired as he was in that moment. As soon as his head hit the pillow, he was out cold. By the time morning broke, there was only a couple of hours left before he would have to return to the site. He grabbed a sandwich, cleaned up his uniform and headed back out towards the location. The only difference between tonight and the previous night was that he knew what to expect, or at least he thought he did. When Barkley walked through the foyer, he was startled by a pink figure holding balloons standing in the middle of the room. It was a new animatronic, with a light frame and what appeared to be a cat-like head. In its left hand, it held a large selection of different coloured balloons, and in its right it held a microphone. But for now, it appeared to be unmoving, so Barkley leaned in for a closer look. "I see you've met our newest animatronic," Sato's voice rang out behind him, causing him to jump and clench his fists, ready to swing. His heart was racing and his breathing laboured. "Sorry about that, you made me jump. You say this is a new animatronic?" Barkley calmed himself, although still angry and concerned about what he had seen earlier in the day. "Well, what I mean to say is you've met an animatronic that was not out yesterday. You see, we have decided to move some of our stock around to give potential buyers a better experience. Don't you think this model will be great to welcome any children? We've bought it up from the basement, so it wasn't on display while she was here last night, unfortunately." Barkley didn't like the idea of children being anywhere near the site, let alone being handed balloons by this machine. He eyed Sato up, looking for any sign that he might be withholding information, but couldn't do too much for risk of revealing his own identity. "I think that's a great idea, but is the animatronic safe if it has been in the basement? Who knows how long it's been there for?" He watched as Sato turned away and began walking in the opposite direction, hand held behind his back. "There is some news I need to inform you of before you start your shift tonight. Unfortunately, during the rounds this morning, we found that one of our animatronics had broken down and is beyond repair. It's located in the haunted halls. We have asked a courier to come and collect the machine for repairs, and they said they would be around at some point tonight. Please see to it that they get to collect the machine and make sure nothing happens to any other animatronics." After that, Sato left the building, leaving him alone. Barkley placed a hand on his head and ran it down his face. He knew exactly which animatronic it would be, and knew exactly what had happened. He had carried a toolbox with him specifically to unbolt the tree animatronic from the ground. He hoped it wasn't too late, and continued to the office, ready for a second night of bloodthirsty robots. The first thing he did when he clocked in was walk towards the haunted halls. He didn't want to see any of the animatronics destroyed, as he knew they were just confused and wanted to live normal lives. When he reached the room where the tree and beast animatronics had been, he fell to his knees beside the tree. The trunk of the tree was jagged and loose. The branches had fallen and the entire machine appeared unsteady. When he looked in the hole where the eye had been, there was no light. Barkley dropped to his knees, saddened. The spectral had given up hope of escape, and the machine died along with it. He was distraught. This was one of those moments where he knew he could have helped, and was only one of the many times that he had to watch a spectral die, because humans couldn't understand what they were. This was the thing Barkley hated most about the agency, the fact that they could help so many more beings by just coming clean to the world about who they were. He would have stayed there longer, thinking about what he could have done, blaming himself for the life that had just been lost. But the moment was halted by a voice singing in the corridor. Sleep, 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 human, sleep. He stood up and slowly walked towards the broken door that led into the room. He placed his ear to the wall, hearing the singing again, and then the more recognisable, grotesque laughter of the beast animatronic. Luckily, it sounded as though the laughter was moving further away, but the singing sounded like it was unmoving and was haunting in the way that it rang through the halls. He was desperate to figure out which animatronic it could have been singing, but he had never heard of the possessed animatronics actually being able to talk without specialised mouthpieces, let alone the ability to sing. A few moments passed and the singing did eventually fade, but it was followed by sounds that scared Barclay much more. The sounds of fists pounding on metal rang through the entire building, followed by a blood-curdling scream. The collection. I thought I had more time. Without thinking, he opened the door and ran out into the hallway, sprinting in the direction of the screams. Towards the front door, he jumped over furniture, slid down the staircase railing and found the foyer empty. He only took a moment to look around, but saw no signs of a body. The only sign that indicated anyone had came through was the fact that the door was blowing frantically with the wind blowing through them. The chain that was holding the doors had been cut, and what appeared to be blood was smeared across the floor. He frantically looked around, hoping to see some sign of where they would have taken the man, but all he could see was the empty space that surrounded him. He felt he had failed again. Not wanting any of the animatronics to escape, Barclay grabbed the chain and lashed it around the door handles. He made sure to make it as tight as he could and locked them in place with a padlock, when a horrifying thought crossed his mind. Where were all the animatronics when I ran down here? As if reading his thoughts, the singing tore through the quiet room. Sleep, 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 human, sleep. Barclay was caught off guard. He realised which animatronic it was. He turned to his left, eyes wide as he saw the balloon animatronic staring down, microphone in hand, singing the same haunting tune. When Barclay turned to run, it was already too late. A bright orange draconic animatronic with a flaming tail swooped down, tackling him to the ground. The machine had 2 large teal wings and was able to fly, something he had never previously seen from animatronics. It had 2 horns and a heavier build, but he didn't have the time that he would have liked to admire it. Barclay struggled for a moment to get from under the dragon-like animatronic. He flailed and pushed to no avail, until it decided it had had enough, grabbing Barclay, head in its 3 clawed hands and smacking his head against the cold ground. His vision became blurred as he tried to stay awake. He fought as hard as he could, still pushing with his fading strength. But as he began to fade in and out of consciousness, he had no choice but to give in to the temptation of sleep. When he awoke, he found himself being dragged by another animatronic. It was primarily grey and loosely resembled a rhinoceros with a drill tip for a horn. Its body, like the majority of the animatronics he had seen to this point, was almost humanoid, but it had a larger, stronger frame and could have easily lifted Barclay off the ground. However, it also appeared to be one of the dumber animatronics, with similar traits to the lumbering powerhouse who is a henchman to a small villain. As he thought about it, Barclay realised the connection too. Hang on, all of these animatronics are not working independently, they are working together for some reason. The dragon, and now this rhinoceros animatronic, are clearly doing the jobs that the balloon animatronic can't, but why haven't I seen this in the possessed animatronics in the past? He didn't think of it any longer and kicked out of the rhino's grip. His 3-fingered hands were clamped around his ankle, but he could slowly feel his foot peeling away from the inside of his boot. It was painful to pull away, but he eventually escaped. Realising he had been dragged down into the basement, he ran back up the stairs and into the foyer. Luckily, the rhino was a slower animatronic, but the dragon was significantly quicker once it managed to find its way around the large frame of the rhino. Barclay got back out into the foyer and looked for the nearest stairs up to the themed areas of the building, specifically to the one with a tunnel of water as its entrance. It had taken moments for the dragon to reach the foyer, and it flew up to the balcony and charged for Barclay again. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, but he wasn't ready to do it. Barclay ducked to the ground as the animatronic missed and shot overhead, arms scrambling to grasp him but too much speed to slow down. The dragon crashed into a pile of half-used paint buckets. It flailed and roared angrily, throwing paint across the walls and floor. Barkley took the distraction and rummaged through the remainder of the room, looking for anything that would be heavy enough to damage the animatronics. Luckily, he found a sledgehammer leaning up against one of the many used workbenches. He then stood in the tunnel and began screaming at the dragon. Come on, you stupid machine, are you seriously being beaten by a few tubs of paint? How pathetic can you be? The dragon was just making its way up and reared onto its hind legs and tail, the eyes turned from white to a bright red, glaring towards Barkley. It roared angrily, spewing a stream of fire that just missed touching him. Good, this might be more effective than I thought. The dragon lifted its wings and shot towards the operative, who was stood ready with the sledgehammer. Just as the dragon's head reached the tunnel, Barkley whipped the hammer into the air, cracking the dragon's head against the glass and smashing the tunnel, spewing water everywhere. As the machine flew through, its eyes and tails were spluttering and sparking. It flew forward, smashing through the glass of the balcony and collapsed into the ground floor. Its body was bent and broken, its eyes had temporarily faded, and the plating was cracked in multiple places. As he watched the result of what he had done, the rhino walked over to its ally and dragged it in the direction of the basement. Barkley stood proud before turning back. Inside the water section he had seen another animatronic, but the whole time he was in the room it didn't attempt to attack. He wondered what the reason for this was, so he decided to analyse the machine. It was a blue, white and red dolphin animatronic designed to look similar to a superhero. The hands were quite large and its body tapered, leading to what was a strange mix between a tail and feet. It didn't take him long to realise, however, the reason for its lack of movement was that it was bolted to the floor and had died in the same way as the tree. Barkley hadn't realised the effect that this could have on spectrals, and realised, whilst barbaric, it was definitely a method he could use for some of the more dangerous animatronics at the village. He whipped out a notepad and wrote his findings before being called by the familiar sound of singing. The balloon animatronic was singing its same tune that was synonymous with the hunt for this machine. Barkley strolled back out of the smashed tunnel, stepping over broken glass and dying fish. He looked out into the open space, expecting the animatronic to be on the ground. By this point the rhino and dragon had been removed, but there were numerous other animatronics staring up into the air. Standing at the point where the balcony had smashed through, Barkley lifted his head to the ceiling, watching as the light-framed balloon holding animatronic floated in the centre of the room. It tilted its head, eyes blaring red, and continued to sing its song. As it continued to sing, the voice became distorted and cracked into something similar to Sato's voice, which made it clear who was actually behind everything. The animatronic, seeming to have control of where it was moving, started towards the balcony. Barkley stormed into the room again to grab a nail gun that he had seen lying unused on the workbench. He looked inside to make sure it was loaded, and held it up, ready to aim as he walked back into the opening. The balloon animatronic was just landing on the balcony when he exited the room, and just stood there for a moment. It stood there, still as Barkley shot multiple nails into the chest piece of the machine. It was unfazed and seemed to snigger a little. He then walked up to the animatronic and kicked it back off the balcony, so it floated into the open space. It sniggered again, before repeating something in Barkley's voice. How pathetic can you really be? It floated higher, as if trying to prove a point. Barkley just smiled and looked up at the balloons before lifting the nail gun to his eye level and taking aim. Almost scrambling to let air out of the balloons, the animatronic flailed and screamed, dropping the microphone and sticking out an open hand, as if begging him to stop aiming. It then reached its hands towards the balloons, attempting to use it as a shield. He pulled the trigger and shot 6 times. The force of the shots popped all the balloons that the machine was holding, and it fell onto the balcony. It scrambled for something to grab hold of but failed, landing on the ground not too far from where the dragon had landed. The other animatronics had left an opening for it to collapse into, scared of being damaged themselves, but then left completely after seeing that the ringleader had been beaten so easily. There were still twitches and sparks coming from the balloon animatronic, but Barkley didn't want to finish it off. Instead of destroying the machine, he wanted to see what would happen and whether the rhino animatronic would make another appearance. It did, and began to drag the balloon animatronic back into the basement, as he had hoped. He ran down after them in an attempt to see what was going on.